The Alternatives to Violence Project, or AVP, began in 1975 at Green Haven Prison in upstate New York. Since then, it has evolved into one of the most important personal transformational programs. This all-volunteer program has offered over 20,000 workshops in the U.S. over the past 40 years, 85% of which have been with inmates in state and federal prisons. AVP provides the experience and interpersonal communication tools to prevent, resolve, and heal intrapersonal and interpersonal conflict through increased self-awareness, empathy, and personal responsibility. AVP has proven effective in a variety of situations, in schools, organizations, prisons, refugee camps, post-Civil War genocide communities, veterans, and with street gangs. One of the reasons AVP is so effective in a variety of situations and settings is that it trains the local people, the people involved in the community, to become facilitators. By local people being facilitators, the credibility of the program is established. AVP empowers individuals and communities. There are currently active programs in 31 states providing over 1,000 workshops annually in 100 prisons and in communities. Internationally, AVP is active in 55 countries, mostly in communities rather than prisons, healing trauma, teaching nonviolence, and community safety. AVP programs are in Russia, Eastern Western Europe, North, Central, South America, the Middle East, Africa, India, Indonesia, New Zealand, and Australia has a university program where 150,000 students have gone through AVP. A core element of AVP is the concept of transforming power. TP is simply tapping into that which is eternal, that part of ourselves, our souls, that connects us and brings us into beloved community where we can truly be who we were meant to be and not who we have had to be to survive or because of others' expectations. At one with each other, at one with all, at one with God. AVP allows us to tap into our innate mental health by creating a safe, connecting experience in which those built-up defenses which disconnect us from our true selves and separate us from each other are no longer necessary, and they effortlessly and naturally fall away. This is a very important quality of AVP. AVP is not religious, but it is very spiritual. Let me repeat this statement because it is so important. AVP allows us to tap into our innate mental health by creating a safe, connecting experience in which those built-up defenses which disconnect us from our true selves and separate us from each other are no longer necessary, and they effortlessly and naturally fall away. This is accomplished by creating an environment, by creating a situation based on affirmation, respect, and caring. This creates trust, connection, and community within which communication and cooperation skills are taught and personal responsibility evolves, and from that there is transformation. The AVP process starts with respect and caring, which creates safety, and that builds trust, which encourages openness and leads to self and other awareness, which is transformational. We have known AVP has been effective for many years, but not until recently have we understood why. With the new information coming out of brain research and other kinds of research on the impact of trauma and neuroplasticity, we now understand why AVP is so effective. One of those studies was the ACEs study, which was conducted by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And the ACE study refers to adverse childhood experience. What the CDC did was looked at 17,000 volunteer participants who were receiving services from Kaiser Permanente. These were employed individuals, 80% of which were white Hispanic, 74% with college experience, and 46% were college graduates. They looked at what childhood trauma these individuals experienced and then saw what happened in their life, what behavior changes there were, what emotional changes, to determine the effect of the childhood trauma. What they found was that there were basically 9 or so kinds of traumas that children experience: abuse, neglect, problems in the environment, for example, someone having substance abuse in the home, a separation or divorce, if someone was mentally ill, if there was domestic violence, if a household member were imprisoned, or if there was a loss of a parent by death, suicide, or abandonment. So these were the childhood issues that were looked at, as well as physical and emotional needs not being met. Then there's the trauma impact on health risk behaviors, as well as neurobiologic effects of trauma. And this whole list in the middle refers to that. Hallucinations, depressions, panic reactions, sleep problems, impaired memory, etc., as well as health risk behaviors like smoking, overeating, physical inactivity, suicide attempts, alcoholism, drug abuse, and so on. Then they looked at what happened later in life, the long-term consequences of the unaddressed trauma. And there were physical issues, which is interesting: heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, emphysema, asthma, liver disease, other physical issues that developed as a result of the trauma, the unhealed trauma. There were also serious social problems: homelessness, prostitution, delinquency, inability to sustain employment, victimization, intergenerational transmission of abuse, and long-term health, behavioral health, and correctional and social service issues. An overview of this process is the following chart. If we look at the far left, we see early trauma and stress, which leads to predictable patterns of brain development, traits, and behaviors. And 3 pathways flow from that. The top is intellectual or cognitive impairment of slowed language and learning, lateralization, and that means the inability to use both the right and the left brains at the same time, diminished IQ, poor decision-making skills. Then in the middle, there's attention problems, ADD, ADHD, and in the bottom, social problems, aggressive behavior, isolation, poor understanding of social cues, which leads to conflict. If you add to that this next line of significant risk of early use or abuse of alcohol, tobacco, illicit and prescription drugs, which exacerbates the problem. The top flow, special education, school failure, dropout. The bottom, the emotional, behavioral aspects of it: suspension, expulsion, delinquency, and dropping out of school. These all lead to the right section, which is low wage jobs, unemployment, public assistance, prisons, chronic health problems, debilitating mental health. So with this, we see the general progression of early childhood trauma, unhealed, and what it leads to in adult behavior. So let's take a look at the next chart, which shows us the strength of the relationship. If we take a child who's had 5 ACEs or 5 types of childhood trauma and compare that to the children who had no ACEs, we see that domestic violence and inter-partner violence, the child with 5 ACEs was 5 times more likely to experience domestic violence, was almost 9 times more likely to be raped, almost 3 times to have an abortion, suicide in women almost 5 times, sexual assault in women 6 times, alcoholism, IV drug use, and attempted suicide almost 17 times more likely to attempt suicide than a child who had had 0 ACE score. Partly as a result of the ACEs study, but then some other research, we have come up with a new understanding for addiction. Vincent Folletti, one of the chief investigators, the prime investigators in the ACEs study, has stated that the basic cause of addiction is predominantly experience-driven during childhood and not substance-dependent. The American Society of Addiction Medicine in 2011 came up with a new definition for addiction, and this is very significant. Addiction is a chronic brain disorder and not simply a behavioral problem involving too much alcohol, drugs, gambling, or sex. What this is saying is that the alcohol, drugs, gambling, and sex are symptoms of a chronic brain disorder. The brain circuitry that governs impulse control and judgment is altered in this disease, resulting in the dysfunctional pursuit of rewards such as alcohol and other drugs. Simply put, addiction is not a choice. Addictive behaviors are a manifestation of a disease and not a cause. Now that we see how important unhealed trauma is, what is the prevalence? Well, the ACEs study showed that 64% of the general population has had some childhood trauma. Now remember, the ACEs study looked at middle-class employed individuals. Individuals coming from inner city, unemployed, etc., are much more likely to have high trauma as a child. And in fact, that bears out with the fact that 60 to 80% of male inmates have experienced significant trauma, and at least 95% of female inmates have also experienced significant trauma. We now understand that poverty in and of itself is traumatic. So it is not surprising that many folks that are in prison lived in poverty, lived in the inner city. Now that we understand the significance of trauma and the prevalence of it, especially unhealed trauma, let's take a look at the actual impact on the brain. If we take a look at this diagram here, which is from Dr. Ledoux of North Carolina, what it shows is that a stimulus occurs. The first place it goes in the brain is the sensory thalamus, which is the distribution center. From there, it is sent out 3 directions: 1 to the amygdala, 2 to the hippocampus, and 3 to the neocortex. The amygdala is our fight or flight center. It's our anger center, our fear center. It's our survival center. So the signal goes very fast to the amygdala. It goes a little bit slower to the hippocampus, which is our memory. It puts things in context. Has this occurred to me before? What was the result? And then an even slower pathway to the neocortex, where it engages our conscious or our logic. Now, what happens with trauma is when it goes to the amygdala automatically shuts off all other pathways. So the information does not go to the hippocampus, does not go to the neocortex. The amygdala has no sense of time, no sense of place. So when we see a veteran experience a flashback, they are back where that trauma occurred, and they have completely lost any sense of where they are, what time it is. They are immediately drawn back to that traumatic experience. So that's why this occurs, because the amygdala has no sense of time or place. Now, when it happens frequently, the neural pathway to the amygdala is reinforced and becomes faster and more predominant. The neural pathways to the hippocampus and neocortex, prefrontal cortex, get smaller. They're not utilized as well. And in fact, you can see in this diagram that the hippocampus and neocortex literally shrink in size. They become physically smaller, which means they process slower and they can't process as much information. So what happens here is someone who's suffering from PTSD, the primary pathway goes directly to the amygdala and not to the neocortex or hippocampus. That's often why when you're in a state of anger and rage, you do something and a second later you realize how stupid it was, you regret doing it, but at the time you were functioning out of your amygdala. Taking a look at the physical change in the brain. The left MRI is of a healthy 11-year-old child. The right MRI is of a child, 11-year-old child as well, suffering from chronic PTSD. If you can see around the edge of the right MRI, all that white space, indicating that the size of the brain has actually shrunk. If we look inside the brain, here inside the MRI, we see less definition in the right as opposed to the healthy child. We also see the brain stem down the center part of the bottom that has increased in size and in length. When we look at the MRI on the left, much more definition. The brain has not shrunk and the brain stem has not increased in size. So there is physical change in the brain structure as a result of unhealed trauma. Let's take a look at a very specific example. This example is of Tonnerre Kane. She lived in Annapolis. She lived under a bridge for at least 2 years. She had been arrested over 80 times, had been put into jail at least 40 times for prostitution, for theft, for drugs. She every time she came to prison, they would say, "Okay, Tonnerre, what have you done this time?" This is a picture of Tonnerre today. She's giving presentations for SAMHSA, the federal drug agency, and she's talking about trauma. She's talking about the impact of healing trauma on her life. Now, what happened here? Well, instead of saying, "Tonnerre, what did you do this time?" Joan Gillese, Dr. Joan Gillese, asked her, "What happened to you?" And her story was that her mother was a drug addict, alcoholic, sold drugs. When individuals would come to buy drugs, when men would come to buy drugs in their home, she would motion upstairs. The men would go upstairs. Tonnerre had 2 younger siblings, and she wanted to protect them. So what she would do is she would go stand in front of the door to protect them. The man, of course, saw her as presenting herself. She says that she cannot count the number of times she was raped and molested. Many, 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 many times. So what Joan did is helped her heal her trauma. And by healing her trauma, she didn't have a need to do drugs. She didn't have a need to do prostitution. She now has a place to live, a job, and a family. She's doing very well. So when people come to us, come to prison, mental health, instead of saying, "What did you do? What is your problem? What is your issue?" we might be asking instead, "What happened to you?" Dr. James Gilligan, psychiatrist with the chief psychiatrist with the Massachusetts prison system, wrote a book, Preventing Violence. And in that book, he said there are 3 conditions for violent criminal behavior. Shame is a necessary but insufficient condition, a lack of empathy, and a lack of awareness in alternative behaviors. AVP directly addresses all 3 of those conditions. Number 1, shame. What happens with shame is we withdraw because we have something we're ashamed of, something we're not proud of, so we don't share it with people and we withdraw into our own shell. AVP treats this by validation, connection, and community building, people coming out of their shell, connecting with others. It addresses empathy by helping the person to increase their own self-awareness and their connection with others in community. In order for me not to have empathy, and this also is an impact of shame, I need to cut off from my own emotions. So I am therefore cutting off from myself. If I cannot experience my own emotions, other than maybe anger and pleasure, then I cannot understand what other people are going through. So empathy is the ability to connect with my own feelings, how I would feel in your situation. So by increasing self-awareness and connection with others in community, people redevelop empathy, which is a natural ability that we have. The third condition that he states is a lack of awareness of alternative behaviors. AVP, through experiential learning, teaches alternative attitudes and behaviors, attitude skills, and interpersonal communication skills. How this relates to the brain, let's take a look at the diagram again of Dr. Ledoux. What AVP does is it quiets the amygdala. When the amygdala is quiet because of safety and trust, then it opens up the channels to the hippocampus and the cortex, the neocortex. The people are experiencing a positive experience in the sense of community within AVP. That is registered in the hippocampus. So now there are positive experiences the person has in the hippocampus to draw on. It also gives specific skills, interpersonal communication skills and attitude skills, which are then in the neocortex. And now we have that as part of our rational thinking. To give you a sense of what a workshop is and the impact, let's take a look at a video called When You Hear the Word Violence.
When you hear the word violence, what comes to your mind? Fighting. Fighting. Yeah, yell it out.
War,
Murder.
pain,
Rape.
suffering,
Prejudice. Injustice. Entertainment.
guns,
Racism.
hatred, grief, starvation,
Verbal abuse.
abuse of power,
making people aware about other people's feelings, like the tools in these groups.
Fighting. Yeah, yell it out.
war,
Murder.
pain,
Rape.
suffering,
Prejudice. Injustice. Entertainment.
guns,
Racism.
hatred, grief, starvation,
Verbal abuse.
abuse of power,
Making people aware about other people's feelings, like the tools in these groups, like the empathy exercise, breaking down what is violence, it just brings an understanding, kind of takes that selfishness out that a lot of people have.
welcome to the workshop for the Alternatives to Violence project. I'm Elevating Eleanor, and let me explain a little bit about what we're going to be doing this weekend. We're going to spend time together learning about transforming the conflict in our lives into something positive and something nonviolent.
For me, a time I had used violence and it hurt me and somebody else. Likewise, I don't believe that I'm violent naturally, but I would have to say the reason that I'm here for. A family was destroyed, and my family was destroyed. My freedom was taken. So, in the end, overall, everybody lost. We all lost. They lost a family member. I lost my family. I lost my freedom.
What we're trying to do is basically be able to look at someone else's problem, and if we can, offer advice on different ways of solving it.
When you can have a problem and hear somebody else say the problem, and you can even get advice on your own problem, that's put yourself in another person's shoes. That one stands out to me, a whole lot.
The problem I'm working on now is not getting bitter about my years away from home. At times I think real negative because I'm frustrated.
They're already here, and that's not changing. To use it as a positive advantage, more as a crutch. People on the inside, they have nothing but time, and they can use that time to educate themselves. The problem I'm working on now is trying to have a working relationship with someone who told a lie on me.
Learn to trust your innocence and when to act with withdrawal. If you know that it's absolutely no truth to the statement that was told about you, why feed into it? Now you're giving the person that told the lie the power. You get what I'm saying? And the person that told the lie, I would tell them to be ready to revise your position if you discover it's wrong. Maybe the lie you told, you felt as though that it was the truth. But if you discover it's wrong, apology, a heartfelt apology, sincere heartfelt apology, a handshake, a conversation, it goes a long way.
The idea is to empower the group, to make them feel that we are not the experts coming and telling you what you need to do. But what we do, we are experts at creating this sense of trust. So that's probably the first thing. You treat people with respect, then trust evolves, and once trust evolves, then barriers fall. And if I let go of my identity, I'm left with my humanity.
I've spent 28 years continuously in the California prison system. I've just been released from prison approximately a month and a half ago. It's an amazing transition. As a matter of fact, I actually drove a judge home last night to his house. So I'm actually just man, I'm just blown away with what's happening with life, When I entered San Quentin for the first time, it was a very racist environment and segregated environment. And so in an AVP workshop, it's not that. It's total opposite of segregation. The beautiful thing about the diverse nature of the community workshops is you see people from different walks of life coming together and revealing the humanity behind the illusions. This person's not like me. This person can't agree with me on anything. You put all the superficial things aside and you see deeply what is real about the people we live with in our community.
Obviously, I wind up in prison with a life sentence. I screwed up pretty badly somewhere. And over the years, I knew I had to make some changes. A lot of the exercises that we do involve exploring who we are and what motivates us and what our triggers are and all kinds of internal kinds of things. And that, for me, that was extremely valuable.
The gathering was something that you don't know about me is. It's kind of a traditional gathering that we do a lot in AVP. And it's usually done, now I've experienced it a lot with more light things like I play the violin or I do this. And I was one of the first ones to go. I remember it started near me. And it just there's a concept we use in AVP called transforming power, and it's like just a sense that we get beyond our own sense of intelligence. And it came to me that I need to just share that I happen to be a gay man.
And what happens is if you share with me at a deep level, that gives me license. That gives me a sense of comfort, sense of safety that I can share with you at that level.
There was one exercise in particular that I recall that stays with me, and that was human to human. One inmate would have their eyes closed and the other one, their eyes open looking at them. And the facilitator was speaking, reading this dialogue. She was saying, those of you that have your eyes open know that the person sitting in front of you has trusted you enough to close their eyes, and know that that person has dreams just like you do. He has a family just like you. He feels pain just like you. And I don't remember the rest of it, but in the course of that exercise, I began thinking of the facilitator who was doing this. And she had mentioned in a previous exercise having had a family member who had been assaulted. And I thought she said killed in a robbery. And I thought, here's this lady coming in here and giving us love. And I realized I could have been the person who killed her son. And it struck me pretty hard. And then I realized that she could have been my mother, and I could have been the one that killed my mother's son. And somewhere in there, this shift took place, and I saw this wonderful human being whose son I had killed. And it's the first time that I ever truly felt the enormity of what I had done. I had maybe intellectually, emotionally, mentally felt remorse, regret, but I had never really experienced it in this sense. And it blew me away. I just started crying. I cried like a baby.
It takes you deep into your soul. It takes you into your true emotions, into those coffins that you have locked away long ago because you didn't want to open it to show nobody. It makes you open them up. And then it takes you up on the top of the roller coaster when you're in that light and lively, or you're just running around having fun, like back in kindergarten or something in the yard, throwing a ball or something. It's a big roller coaster, man, but it's a good one. It's fun, man. We have a lot of fun. And we do like liveries, we do interactive discussion. You bounce your ideas off the group. You just create a whole atmosphere of connectedness. We build community. And when everybody in the community is on the same page, everything flows and we have fun.
We're all connected to each other, through each other. Now, if we can just gently, please, place the web to the ground, let me hold its shape.
It's not just a lecture. No one's just talking at everybody. We learn together and we have fun together.
Walking around like a gorilla while quack like a duck.
All right, that concludes.
I think it kind of takes people back to their childhood, Everybody's older and dealing with different problems, stuff like that. But just to get away from it for a little while, light lives are very important.
And it was the closest thing to a vacation that any of us got. For a couple of days, 3 days, we didn't have a lot of the cares and worries. We've had a pretty secure place where we felt safe and we could do things that were fun,
It
AVP is for anybody that has an open mind. You don't have to want to change. You don't have to want to be a better person. But just have an open mind and see what happens.
There's no better time than in the middle of a struggle to find and use and develop peace.
I'm not always equal in society. I'm kind of like second class. And in an AVP circle, I'm an equal part of that circle.
Being a believer in AVP and transforming power, I believe that, there's always a solution to be found, a healthy solution, a cooperative solution, no matter how hidden. And I really do believe that.
If we can find a way to engage each other in dialogue that's set where we don't judge each other by where we come from, how much we know, how much money we have. If we just talk human to human.
It's a process of remembering the truth, that we're all alike, we all are the same.
The walls that I was behind diminished in that moment.
Imagine how much peace can be spread in this world.
We think of men like Gandhi and Martin Luther King as like these extraordinary men, which they were, but at the same time, I believe that same strength that they drew from to do what they did, we all have that in us. We can all draw from that same strength. It takes sacrifice, of course, and it takes making a change within ourselves, but it's possible nonetheless. So I was just saying, give it a try. What you got to lose?
I watch him dancing on the edge, balancing on the tightrope, quick to jump ship with no knowledge of a lifeboat. They hoping they might float away from the danger, but they cater to their anger and they gamble with their life, so you could bet they violent. Filled up with that malice and that pride, that'll kill you faster than the pack of lions can. Sad enough for violence, sort of makes the mind wonder, cause majority in their prime, like odd numbers, yet they dying out, hurt from all the murder, so we search for alternatives to try them out. Though we used to fugitive solutions, they be hiding out, never lose heart, but stay sharp like a piranha mouth. Yeah, we know what drama about, transforming power, what we stand for. What you saw here is just a sample, real life example. Take that kid wilding like he Rambo. What if someone were to lend an ear, Vincent Van Gogh, hear his fears and maybe on his path, new light would appear like a lamppost. I'm just saying though, it's suffice to say that AVP will change your life, you give it a chance to.
A few comments from AVP participants. One relates to attitude. With AVP, I began to grow from a person filled with hate, anger, and despair into a person who believes he too is responsible for the protection, preservation, and enrichment of humanity. Concerning safety, that we are all the same beneath all that has given us to experience. That no matter what persona or mask we wear, we can be reached, loved, and healed. Only a group of this nature can provide us with a safe environment to remove this mask. Empathy. I went into the workshop as a pessimist and I came out a changed person. I was alive. I was actually alive. I liked what I saw in myself. It was a real high, and I've been doing it for 2 years. And I love that feeling. And to see other people awaken in the workshop, to see their lives change. Alternatives. I have been in every group in the institution, and they were all generic. They gave the same information. There were very few solutions offered. When you are given the information without the solution, you are still lost. AVP gave me some concrete solutions. The risk factors for reoffending, sometimes called criminogenic factors. Attitude, peers, personality are the first group. Then employment, family, substance abuse is the second group. The third group is housing, finances, personal distress, lower socioeconomic status. all of these are important. Obviously, if you don't have employment, that creates problems. If you don't have housing or finances, that creates problems. However, the first group, attitude, peers, and personality, unless those are effectively dealt with, the latter ones are much less effective. So AVP focuses on attitude, which changes who people associate with and thus their peers, and their giving skills, interpersonal skills, which changes their personality. So AVP has a very direct impact on the important risk factors for reoffending. A few statistics of the impact of AVP. These are research studies. AVP reduced trait anger from 9% above the community norm to 18% below that norm. What trait anger is your tendency to get angry, not how you are at the moment, but your tendency to get angry. And what AVP did in this one study, it reduced trait anger from 9% above the community norm. In other words, the participants were more likely to get angry at smaller instigations, and reduced it to 18% below the norm for the community at large outside of the prison. So when the folks finished AVP, and this was true for 2 years after, there was a follow-up evaluation 2 years following. So when these folks are released who have experienced AVP, they are less likely to get angry than people in the normal community. Another study showed that it reduced inmate behavior write-ups by 60%. This is obviously very important to prison administration. And it had a dramatic and highly significant reduction in violent attitudes. Bottom line, AVP reduced recidivism in one study by 47%. PBS did a special documentary on a California prison looking primarily at gang violence and the problem with segregating gangs within the prison system. A central focus of this documentary was the impact of AVP. It followed two people who took AVP, became leaders in AVP, and followed one of them after they were released, and the other one was still in prison when this ended. He has since been released. So this can give you a sense within the prison walls. And if you take a look at PBS's homepage, they will show you some videos, and one of those videos is In an Ideal World. This presentation has been intended to give you a sense of AVP, its power, and its usefulness. It can be used in many different settings, and it can especially be used in conjunction with other programs. There are currently 31 states that have active programs, and you can go onto the AVP website, that's avpusa.org, to find programs in your state. If there is no program in your state, then you can contact AVP USA, and quite often they can find facilitators who will come into a state or an area where there is no program and help people set up a program and do the training of community volunteers. Usually what happens, there'll be a few people on the outside, community volunteers, who will go in, and there will also be inmate facilitators who will be leading the workshops. So it doesn't take a whole lot of people on the outside to maintain an effective program.